It was a quiet night when Lisa, a successful young architect in her late 20s, moved into her new apartment. The high-rise building overlooked the city's neon-lit skyline, promising the perfect blend of urban life and solitude. The place was modern, sleek, with just enough space for her and her thoughts. Lisa had been looking forward to a fresh start after a tough breakup and some personal struggles. Little did she know, the apartment would be the site of her deepest fears. The apartment's centerpiece was an antique mirror. It was a large, ornate piece, framed in dark wood, with intricate carvings that almost looked alive when viewed under the right light. Lisa didn't think much of it at first, but something about the reflection unsettled her. She often found herself staring into it longer than she intended, unable to look away. It wasn't vanity, but more of a pull, like the mirror had a magnetic force urging her to stay. The first sign. A few days into her stay, Lisa started noticing things. Subtle things. At first, it was the feeling of being watched, like eyes on her back when no one was there. But it wasn't just a psychological discomfort. The reflections were wrong. One evening, while Lisa was brushing her hair, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. But her reflection, it wasn't quite right. The face staring back at her was distorted, slightly off-center, as though the reflection was lagging behind her every move. She blinked, expecting her reflection to reset, but it didn't. The image in the mirror held its ground, staring back at her with hollow eyes. A cold chill ran through her. When she moved, so did the reflection, but it was no longer synchronized. It smiled at her, just a faint curve of the lips, but it wasn't her smile. Her heart pounded in her chest. She rushed out of the room, feeling the weight of the mirror's gaze on her. Lisa tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, some strange optical illusion. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The night of uncertainty. One night, Lisa woke up to a faint sound, a low hum that seemed to come from the direction of the living room. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but the sound grew louder and she couldn't ignore it. It was almost like whispering, a breathy voice murmuring in the darkness. Tentatively, she got out of bed and made her way to the living room. The apartment was silent, save for the low hum emanating from the mirror. As she approached, the humming ceased, but something was off. The reflection in the mirror wasn't hers. The figure staring back at her was shadowed, obscured by a dark presence that wasn't there before. It moved, just slightly, but Lisa could feel the presence behind her, something breathing down her neck. Turning around, she expected to see nothing, but the air in the room had thickened, suffocating her. There was a sensation of being trapped. The walls seemed to close in, and the dim light flickered as if struggling to stay alive. She backed away slowly, but as she turned, she saw a figure standing in the reflection. It wasn't her, but someone else. A man wearing a tattered coat, with a face that was barely distinguishable. His features seemed to shift, melting into something monstrous, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Lisa screamed and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. There was no way she was imagining it. She had to get out of this place, but the reflection kept calling her back. Its presence a constant, looming terror, the descent into madness. The next few days were a blur. Lisa couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that man in the mirror. She started to lose track of time, unable to distinguish between what was real and what was a nightmare. The whispering became louder, the hum constant. Every time she passed the mirror, she could feel it calling her. She had to know what was on the other side. One night, after drinking too much wine to numb the terror, Lisa stood in front of the mirror again. This time, she didn't look away. She stared deeply into her own reflection, trying to summon the courage to face whatever was pulling her in. And then it happened. The man in the mirror wasn't just a reflection anymore. He stepped forward, his face now fully visible, a hollow, lifeless visage, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight into her soul. He reached out toward her, his fingers grazing the surface of the glass. The reflection rippled like water. Suddenly, she felt the coldest chill, as though the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. The hairs on her neck stood on end as she watched the man stretch his hand out further, his fingers grazing the surface of the glass. Then, just as her hand instinctively reached for him, the reflection twisted. It wasn't Lisa in the mirror anymore. It was someone else, someone she didn't recognize. The face was now her own, but her eyes were wide, lifeless, as if her soul had been ripped out. The haunting continues. Lisa was never found again. Her friends came looking for her, but when they arrived, the apartment was empty, the glass shards from the mirror scattered on the floor. The reflection of the man was gone, but Lisa's absence remained. Months later, another tenant moved into the same apartment, and once again, the story repeated itself. The new resident, unaware of the cursed history, stared into the mirror, and just as Lisa had, saw the face of the man, waiting. The cycle continued, for every new tenant would eventually fall prey to the curse that lingered in the reflection, trapped in a maddening pursuit of their own darkness. The reflection, it was said, would never release its victims. A world behind the glass. When Lisa opened her eyes again, she was no longer in her apartment. Instead, she found herself standing in a dark, eerie version of her living room, yet everything felt wrong. The furniture was distorted, the shadows darker than they should be. The air was thick with the smell of decay and dust. And the mirror, it had grown larger. Towering above her, its reflection distorted in ways that made it seem as though the glass was not just reflecting a room, but a world beyond her understanding. The face staring back at her wasn't her own anymore. It was the figure from the mirror, standing where she had once been. The voice in her head grew louder, speaking directly to her mind. "Welcome home, Lisa. You've finally come to claim your place." She wanted to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. Her body felt frozen in place, rooted to the floor, unable to move. From the depths of the reflection, she saw something else. Figures slowly stepping forward, emerging from the glass like phantoms. They were other people. Screaming faces, twisted, trapped in the mirror with her. Their eyes were hollow, empty, like Lisa's had become. Their hands pressed against the glass, desperately reaching for her as if trying to warn her. But they couldn't escape either. One by one, the figures began to speak, their voices merging with the whispering tones in Lisa's mind. "You're one of us now. You will never leave." The figure in the mirror, the entity, the figure, moved toward her in the darkened room. It had been watching her, guiding her to this moment. It was no longer simply a reflection. It had a presence, a body made of darkness, and it moved with an unsettling speed. Lisa tried to back away, but her feet remained glued to the ground. It stopped in front of her, towering above her fragile form. It was now just inches away from her face. Its mouth opened wide, revealing sharp, jagged teeth that seemed to elongate in an unnatural fashion. The eyes, those sickly yellow eyes, drilled into hers, and Sarah could feel her soul trembling. It whispered, its voice dark and cold. "You were always meant to be here, Lisa. You were chosen. The mirror calls to those who are lost, and you were lost long before you came here." Lisa felt her chest tighten, as though the air was being sucked from her lungs. The figure reached out toward her, its cold, bony hand brushing her cheek. The touch sent a shockwave of ice through her body. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, but the figure's grip tightened around her heart. She was being pulled into its gaze, drawn deeper into the reflection, unable to escape. The final confrontation, terrified, Lisa backed away, but the reflection, no, the entity, wasn't content to remain in the mirror. The air around her thickened, the walls pressing in, until the only thing left was the face in the glass. She felt something grab her wrist from behind, pulling her closer to the reflection. In a panic, she screamed. Her voice was drowned out by the whispers, thousands of whispers echoing through the apartment, calling her name. But no matter how hard she tried, her body felt paralyzed, as though the reflection had taken control of her every movement. The face in the mirror smiled, that same smile she had seen before, except now it was her smile, twisted and filled with malice. With no other option, she made a desperate decision. Lisa grabbed a nearby lamp and swung it at the mirror. It shattered with a loud crash, and for a moment everything went silent. But then came the laugh, low, guttural, and filled with unholy triumph. It came from the fragments of glass on the floor, the pieces of the shattered reflection. The whispers grew louder, but they were no longer in the apartment. They were in her head. They were inside her mind.